This is episode number 5 with Geoffrey Wade. Coming up.
The very first song, he says, I am I, Don Quixote. The whole thing are questions of identity. Who are you? And this is a man who tries to choose his identity. I started to look at Dowd as a person rather than as a funny guy. It made me focus on what was driving Dowd. And then it made me ask all those questions that you're supposed to ask. But you're not making brake linings, you know? You're not on an assembly line. You're not a doctor. So just do your job. We took off our crowns and swords and cloth of gold and moved silent on the road to Elsinore.
Hey there, thank you so much for checking out this podcast. Are you a subscriber yet? If not, click that subscribe button so that you do not miss anything ahead. And if you have an extra moment, go ahead and rate and review the show in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. That will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all your comments and thank you so much for doing that. Hello and welcome to the Working Actor's Journey. My name is Nathan Agan, and this podcast is in-depth interviews with working actors, people who have been doing this and getting paid for it professionally for 30, 40, 50 plus years. It is about finding out what took them from A to B. How did they get started? How do they actually work on material? What challenged them? What did they face early on in their career? What do they still get challenged by? And what have they learned from a lifetime of acting? That's what the goal and the purpose of this show is, and so I'm glad you are here. Now, a quick word about me, your host. Again, my name is Nathan Agan. I'm an actor. I studied theater at the University of Southern California, done a lot of theater, a little bit of TV and film. I'm also an entrepreneur, work for myself online. I'm a bit of a goofball, which maybe you'll hear on this show. And I'm also a bit of a Shakespeare nerd, love studying it, reading it, performing it whenever I get the opportunity. Just so you know, there's going to be about 10 episodes for the first season of this podcast. In the acting business and in life, there is so much uncertainty and vulnerability and rejection. Wouldn't it be nice as an actor if you could find a little bit of peace in the process? Back in 2010, I found something that really helped me out with a lot of the anxiety and worry, and that is meditation. I really wish I had known about this when I was pursuing a career in acting in Los Angeles. Now, fast forward to today, I haven't missed a day of meditating in 7 years. I find it that useful. And that's also why I created a free online course delivered by email. So you can go to freemeditationcourse.com and sign up right now. It has tips and ideas and advice and scientific evidence because it has been proven it's good for you. You can start with just 30 seconds. I guarantee you will experience a difference. Go to freemeditationcourse.com and start your journey right now. Today on the show is Geoffrey Wade, a man of many talents. He is an actor, director, teacher, photographer, and acting coach. He was born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley of California. He attended Amherst College in Massachusetts, and he trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. He has done national tours of the musical Crazy for You and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which he just finished up in 2017. And I actually saw the production with both him and his wife in it when they made a stop in Chicago. It's a really fantastic piece of theater, and very glad I got a chance to see Geoffrey in it. He has also appeared on Broadway and has worked for years with the Weston Playhouse in Vermont, and we actually talk a little bit about that working relationship. He has also worked extensively in regional theater. Recent shows include a starring role in Man of La Mancha, and also Amadeus, Guys and Dolls, Barefoot in the Park, and Educating Rita. He has over 35 credits on IMDb, and in recent years he's done appearances on Mad Men and NCIS. He's another actor from the Antias Company who was in Mother Courage and Her Children with me, along with Angie Bird from episode number 3 and Harry Groner from episode number 4. I've also done several stage readings with him, and I've also been taught by Geoffrey at Antaeus. I actually remember him being particularly helpful when I was working on Lord Byron's monologue from Tennessee Williams' Camino Real. It's a very dense and somewhat abstract piece, and I just remember him being very helpful with that. So some of what we chat about today includes Geoffrey living in Italy as a teenager, his earliest inspirations, the show and role that changed acting for him, playing Don Quixote 40 years apart, working with Steven Spielberg in the BFG, what being a professional means, advice for doing non-paying theater, and a whole lot more. Geoffrey also gives us a look behind the scenes into his performance as the player in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard, and he delivers an amazing performance from that part, so be sure to stick around for that. One of the things I love about Geoffrey is that he gives it to you straight. He doesn't dance around, he doesn't mince words, doesn't beat around the bush. He always keeps it very simple, very to the point, and he does not disappoint in today's show. So here we go with episode number 5. Please enjoy my chat with Geoffrey Wade. So how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. It's another perfect day in Southern California.
Oh, good, good. You know, I was fascinated to learn that you know Italian.
I do.
That has never come up, like, in all the years I've known you. And I saw that. I'm like, how did I not know Geoffrey knows, and not just like knows Italian, like I know, intermediate Spanish. It's like you seem to be able to speak this fluently, right?
I did speak it very fluently at one point. I was back in actually between high school and college. I was an American Field Service exchange student, the AFS. Everybody used to know it because when I was a kid, there was always an AFS student in your high school. American Field Service is the first and oldest and probably still the best of the exchange student programs. It actually started with a bunch of ambulance drivers in World War I who believed that people living together would understand each other better and perhaps avoid the horrors of the war that these men had just gone through. So they set up this program, and it mainly started with bringing kids from Europe to the United States, and they would live for a year, high school kids. They'd live for a year with a family, not as a guest, but as a member of the family sort of thing. And, go to school and get all those sort of experiences. And then it expanded to where American kids were going to Europe. And it's a worldwide program now. Kids from all over the world come here, and Americans go abroad. This was a long time ago when I did it. 50 years ago. Oh my God. So the programs may have changed, but it's very interesting and very challenging. I was fortunate enough to go to Italy. When you apply, you have to, prove that you're a person who's flexible and interested, and they match you with a family, and that family can be anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. That's all me as an applicant, that's all I get to choose, Northern or Southern Hemisphere. And I got matched with a family in Italy and lived there for a year. So, 50 years ago, my Italian was very good. It's a little sketchier now. It was a great experience,
Where in Italy were you living?
I was in a town called Mantova in Italian, or Mantua. That's the town that Romeo flees to when he leaves Verona. If you recall, that's the way most actor people know where Mantova is. It's up in the most fertile, arable region of Italy. So it's not really the Midwest of Italy, but it's kind of a large agricultural center. It was very big. It was very big in the Renaissance, very important town then. It was a great place to live.
And in addition to being a high school student, were there, other things you were getting involved with, like just kind of culturally, or, you were this young guy in Italy.
Yeah. There are a couple of things. There were programs set up by the AFS chapter in Italy. So around Christmas time, there were about 25 of us scattered throughout Italy, American students, and we all came from where we were living to Rome for maybe a week around Christmas time or a little earlier than that. And I got together so that we all had a chance to go to Rome and see that stuff. At the end of the program, when we left our host families, we all went to small towns in the south of Italy because we'd all been in nice, basically sort of middle-class settings, middle or upper middle-class settings in the north of Italy. And the man who ran the program for AFS in Italy thought we needed to see another side of the country. So we were all living on farms and, pretty extremely rural, not big mega farms, little family farms in the south of Italy. And that was an eye opener. That was really, it was fascinating. It was fascinating. And, there were cultural aspects because, you became friends with people. So this guy who I met in Mantova, a bunch of us went to La Scala in Milan because he was a big opera fan and he thought we should all go see this opera. So that was my first big opera. And little things like that. It's an experience that's mostly made up of small moments, not big thing. Mm-hmm. But it was all I could do. I was trying to learn the language. I was trying to do schoolwork. It was tiring. You're doing all that at the same time. You don't speak English. Nobody in that town spoke English. It was like being in, a big Midwestern city. You're not going to find a lot of people who are multilingual. Fortunately, it's an easy language to learn.
Yes. Well, there was one point where I was very determined to learn Italian because I was thinking I would love to visit there. And, I still remember from like the Pimsleur CD, like it's just kind of burned in my memory, the one phrase, che cosa vorrei bere? And it's like, what do you want? What do you want to drink?
Yeah. Cosa vorrei bere? Yeah. I spent 12 weeks in Berlin with a tour. I was doing a show, and the phrase I remember is "Noch ein Bier bitte," which means another beer, please. So,
all these very relevant.
Yeah, but those are the important phrases you learn. Yeah.
All right. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in San Marino, California, which is right next to Pasadena. Everybody knows Pasadena, where the Rose Bowl is, and all that. San Marino is another much smaller town right next to it in the San Gabriel Valley.
And what did your parents do?
My dad was an attorney, and my mother was, I guess, a housewife. She didn't actually work. Although it's interesting, she was always involved in, I guess you'd say, liberal or humanistic causes, and I'm sure had a big influence on me that way. Big in the Democratic Party, which in San Marino you could hold a meeting in a phone booth. That was not a lot of Democrats in San Marino. But she was always involved with the NCCJ, which is the National Conference of Christians and Jews, the NAACP. She did a lot of volunteer work for the American Friends Service Committee, and then became deeply involved with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers movement later on. Yeah.
Wow.
And Dad was an attorney.
So, I mean, was he doing like criminal cases, or are you doing a lot of?
He did all kinds of things. I remember, when I was a kid, I asked him once, and I mean, he had a very small. It was just him and another guy in their practice in downtown L.A. And I think he did a little bit of everything because he said he had done some criminal stuff, but I think he was mainly, civil things and contracts and stuff. And he eventually went to a big firm later in his life in Los Angeles. I'll tell you an interesting thing, though, about he was a bit of a performer. In some ways, I learned kind of later on that he'd been in the men's chorus at Oberlin. He went to Oberlin College, and so he'd been a fairly serious singer that way. I don't think he did any acting. And I remember this. I remember when he getting ready for a trial, which is like a kind of performance, the whole sort of atmosphere in the house would change. You could tell he was getting, charged up, or it was an exciting, challenging thing. And I remember once, as a kid, you don't know these things, but a trial settled just before it actually began. I think they'd probably gone as far as jury selection or something, but then it settled. And what I remember was his disappointment, because he'd really, he was set. He was ready to go. He'd done all his prep, and I think he was looking forward to kind of getting out there and mixing it up. And what I remember about that whole experience was that even though I think it had settled in his favor, but I remember his saying he was looking forward to the actual experience of the trial, which is a performance venue.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like, getting the call that, before opening night, the play's been canceled. It's just...
Yeah, exactly. You do all the work. You're all good to go. You're ready to go. You don't want it to be canceled. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that was kind of laying any kind of seeds for you as a performer, or where did that start? I mean, was it a very artistic or cultural family, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that specifically laid the seeds. I don't know. I mean, I can think of, combinations of things. Yes, it was artistic in a way. We got taken to, young people's series at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, for example. I can remember the guy's name, Johnny Green. He was the conductor. So, we'd be dragged there, I guess, because I didn't particularly want to go, but we went. And I remember being taken to art exhibitions. A famous story in our family is when I was in kindergarten or first grade or something, I'd done a drawing and, to draw a house. And so I'd drawn a house and the smoke coming out and all that stuff. And I'd drawn a big sun in the corner, with the rays coming down. And the teacher, this idiot, had said, "You can't draw the sun in the picture. Just the light from the sun, but you can't draw a sun in a picture. You can't look." I remember this. And then for some reason, so I was properly chastened, but then we went to an exhibition of Van Gogh paintings, where, of course, there are gigantic suns, full suns painted. And I remember recounting this to the teacher, that I just saw this famous guy's painting, that he's got a sun in it. So all that tells me is that I was taken to art galleries or exhibitions or something as a child. And, when you grow up in San Marino in the public school system, you, at some point, or probably every couple of years, you get taken to the Huntington Gardens and Art Gallery, which are one of the great collections of human endeavor, I think, in the world, because there are these fantastic gardens. There's a fairly good collection of art, painting, sculpture, all kinds of things. And then a library, a scholarly library of the very highest caliber, most of which is not accessible to the public. It's a place where scholars work. But you can go through they have an exhibition room, and you can see, first folios and Shelley's notebook and just all kinds of things that are wonderful. It's a great place. So you get taken there as a kid. So yes, I had exposure to the arts.
And so when did acting drop in? Was that in high school at all? Were you doing performances?
Yes. It was junior high school. And I do remember, I remember a couple of things that interested me in acting. I remember watching my brother do a play when he was in high school. The Diary of Anne Frank actually was the one. And thinking it was kind of magical the way he became another person. He, of course, played the lawyer in Anne Frank. He also was a lawyer. My father was a lawyer. My brother was a lawyer. I got a lot of lawyers in the family. But I remember thinking that was kind of magical. I remember some movies that excited me, and there's this element of magic, of transformation always. I remember the Jimmy Stewart Harvey, which, as much as anything, it's delightful, and the play itself is kind of magical, and the performance and everything about it entranced me. So that may have had an influence.
I mean, it is with that particular movie. It is kind of fascinating, like how the imagination is so in play there. Like how you have to really believe that this guy is seeing this 6 foot tall rabbit, and it's just amazing, like how committed that actor is, and how you start to see what he's seeing. Like it is that magical quality of like, wow, I'm now seeing this.
Yes, and there's another story about Harvey, which I'll tell you later. You can remind me. But so that was an influence. I remember seeing the movie version of Arsenic and Old Lace, and I happened to, the way television used to work in the old days, kids. You just you couldn't choose what was on. I just happened to catch it, probably within the first minute or two, but I didn't know what I was watching. And I didn't know it was I didn't know anything about it. I didn't really know who Cary Grant was. So this is kind of a reminder that everything's better if you don't know the stars, if you don't know the actors, if you don't know the story. You have a kind of clean experience, which is what I did with Arsenic and Old Lace, of all things. And I just sort of happened to catch it. And I have this memory of watching it alone, but just on regular television in the way back when you had to walk up to the television and turn the knob.
Of course, yeah, the clunk, clunk, clunk to turn which channel you want to go to.
But I remember watching that and once again just being transported. So I guess it's interesting, our conversation. What was it that caught me about this profession or acting or theater in general? And I seem to be using words like magic and transported and being taken completely out of yourself. So those things, for whatever reason, all had a real appeal to me.
Well, I mean, what's also interesting, and this is like a huge jump forward, but I know you've also played Don Quixote in Man of La Mancha, which is this another kind of journey of magic and imagination, and I mean, it is kind of interesting that that was part of your career.
Yeah, it is, and actually, I've played that twice. I played it once when I was in college, when I was 23 or so, and then I played it last year when I was 66, and it's really interesting. You learn it's very different. I don't think I was probably horrible even the first time, because it's a character one can relate to, but when you get older, and it's a story. I could talk about this play for a long time. It's really a story about Cervantes, who's trying to save himself. He's trying to save his work by acting out this story of Don Quixote. But then Don Quixote is also a man who's trying to find his identity. The very first song, he says, "I am I, Don Quixote." The whole thing are questions of identity. Who are you? Who are you? And this is a man who tries to choose his identity. He's just he's a kind of low-grade Don who decides to become this knight from 400 years ago. It's as if we all started walking around in Renaissance gear. That's the way he would appear to his contemporaries. And it's every time he walks into a place, everybody goes, who's this guy? What's the matter with this guy? And it's a man who has chosen completely to re-identify himself. And he has to keep saying it. Who are you? I'm Don Quixote. I'm Don Quixote. And people are trying, the thrust of some of the other characters, the bad guy in the place, to make him see who he really is. He's just trying to force him back into reality. And he does this in the end, by presenting him with mirrors. He forces him to look at himself. Not a noble knight, just an old man who's pretending something that isn't real. And that was, I remember doing that scene as a 23-year-old, and it was effective because it's well written, and it's an effective piece of theater. But when you're, a person who's can see the light at the end of the tunnel now, and you get a great scene like that where someone says, "Here, look at yourself. Look at yourself. you've accomplished nothing. You're nothing. And here's all you are, just this. And there are actual mirrors there on stage, and you're looking at yourself and you're covered in makeup and sweat and it doesn't look good. Those are easy scenes to play. It's a physically demanding and it's emotionally demanding scene, but it's easy, it's a pleasure. So we're really getting into the meat of it here. I would say when you asked me about when I started, I actually started when I was in 7th grade acting. I did a play called The Prince and the Pauper, and that was the first play I did on stage in front of people. Played the Latin instructor.
Had you only played the Italian instructor, it would have been a great foreshadowing.
It would have been
great. Well, I mean, with Man of La Mancha, and I'm certainly not as familiar with the play as you are, but it is, it's so universal, that idea of we all want our lives to have mattered. We want to have done something that lives beyond us in some way, that people remember us. And it's like you said, I can understand what you're saying in terms of like, these are easy scenes, because of course, on the one hand, they're extremely challenging and demanding, but on the other, there is writing sometimes that so clearly speaks to what we are feeling, that it's just, you don't need to spend as much time going, what is the motivation? Where's the character coming from? It's just like, oh, I get this.
Yeah. And easy may not be the best word, but it's available. Those
yes.
The things that character is going through are available to us and to the audience. It's not a big reach for them to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I wanted to get to college, but you said you had another Harvey story. What was that?
Well, it's interesting because that happened in college. So I'd always wanted to play the part of Elwood P. Dowd, and I still do. I still think I could play it again. But I got an opportunity in college, and by then, I was acting was working out. I seemed to have a facility for it, and so I got. There was a summer theater program at. I went to a place called Amherst in Massachusetts, and so we were doing the play, and we were rehearsing it. All the football players were there getting ready for the opening of football season. And the actors were there acting. School hadn't started yet. Classes hadn't started. So one of the plays we were doing was Harvey, and I got to play Dowd, and I thought, this is great. I'll be able to do this because I'm a kind of Jimmy Stewart type, and all this stuff is funny. And in the course of rehearsals, I was finding that actually it wasn't working very well. It wasn't coming somehow. This character that I thought I knew, and this was kind of perhaps a young actor thing. And I remember having a phone conversation. Here's another throwback thing, because Amherst is way out in Massachusetts. And I was speaking with my mom back here in California, but I was on a payphone. I can remember this conversation. I remember where I was standing on a payphone, which again, nobody knows what the hell's a payphone. Having this conversation with her and saying, it's funny this isn't working out as easily as I thought. And she started talking about having seen Harvey on stage with the original Elwood P. Dowd, who was an actor named Gig Young. Terrific actor. And she was talking about what a great performance it was, different from Jimmy Stewart's. She said there was something more to it, something deeper perhaps, or something. And then she mentioned that Gig Young was a serious alcoholic, died way too young. Terrible, terrible alcoholic. And it probably ruined his career in the end, certainly as a stage actor. And that kind of sprung it for me, because I started to look at Dowd as a person rather than as a funny guy, rather than as a charming guy who's like Jimmy Stewart and everybody likes him, and so I'll just be charming and everybody will like me. And it made me focus on what was driving Dowd. And then it made me ask all those questions that you're supposed to ask. He's funny and he's sort of overly direct to people. He says, someone will say, "Oh, it's nice to meet you. We'll have to get together sometime." At which point he says something like, "When?" And they go, "Well, I don't know. How about next week?" He says, "Thursday? You want to come around on Thursday?" And they go, "Sure." And then he has these famous speeches I used to use. One of them got me into drama school, actually, about the nurse at the sanitarium says, what do you do? What do you do with Harvey? She's trying to humor him. And he says, well, we sit in the bars and we talk to people, and we have a couple of drinks, and pretty soon people come over and they talk to us and they tell us our problems, and I introduce them to Harvey, and he's better than anything they have because he's so big. And when people leave, they leave impressed. Well, that's a story of a man who has no friends. He's a lonely man. He drinks all the time. And then I began to think, this was written in 1950. That's 5 years after the end of the war. This is something I often do with characters. I think, well, what's their age in the play or whatever I'm doing? When were they born? What did they live through? Here's a he should be sort of early middle-aged man who's been through the war. So what was his war experience? Even if it wasn't combat, it was something else. And I began to look at him, instead of as this funny guy, as a man who there were reasons why he behaved that way. And it opened everything up. It was really, really interesting. And I guess maybe a kind of seminal moment.
No, it certainly sounds like it. And I can definitely relate with my own acting. I can look back and there's this, sometimes you have an idea of what you think you should be doing on stage, of how the character is supposed to be and how the acting is supposed to be and how you're supposed to say your lines. And then you, well, hopefully, or maybe ultimately, you can understand like, oh, wait, if I just ask the right questions and do the right research, and that can be different for, everybody, but that can start to inform, who this person is, as you were saying. It's like you're starting to actually inhabit this person as opposed to playing at an idea of what you think it is.
Absolutely right. Yep.
So you mentioned getting into drama school. So I mean, obviously going to Amherst was a huge leap from California, going across the country to Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. What was the decision to go to London? Or I mean, did you apply to a number of different places and then just London was the right spot?
Yeah, kind of a combination of those answers. I did when I was at Amherst, and things were going very well there in terms of acting. I got to do a lot. Interesting thing there, kind of side note, it didn't necessarily have a great theater department. It was very small and maybe not the most challenging of all time. But what you did get to do, or I got anyway, and a number of us, you got a lot of stage time. And you just got to do a lot of things. It was a very good theater, about 400 seats and, real stage house and everything, a real theater. So we got to do a lot. And fortunately, there were a number of other good actors at Amherst and Smith and Mount Holyoke, which, are the schools in that area. Amherst at the time was all male. Smith and Mount Holyoke, of course, are all women schools. But there was a lot of, we'd have to draw from all those schools. Right. They a lot of
intermingling. Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to avoid the word a lot of intercourse between those schools, but there was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So there just happened to be a bunch of people who were really good actors, and everything worked out. So as I was approaching the end of my time there, I thought I wanted more training. It may have been a function also of sort of not wanting to deal with the real world, but yeah, I wanted more training. And I didn't want to get an MFA. I wasn't interested in doing any more academic work. That wasn't my main thing. So that sort of cut out a lot of programs.
You were more looking for like the actual training,
conservatory.
like
like Juilliard or the Goodman School at the time was a great one here. And I was looking for I wanted a conservatory. I didn't want to do any more academic work, so that sort of narrowed things down. And I remember having a conversation with a guy who was the head of the theater drama department at Mount Holyoke. Really good, interesting guy. And he said, you should go to England. You should go to England to get training. That's what he thought. England sounded interesting and appealing. I've always been kind of an Anglophile. It's kind of a long story. I don't want to go on too much. I did apply to several schools there. And I think I applied to some schools in the U.S. through a weird combination of circumstances. Central scheduled me for an audition on the day I was going to go to England with a friend of mine. I hadn't asked for an audition there. I thought that I was going to audition for them in the States. But anyway, it worked out. I flew to England on that night. The next morning, a few hours later, I went to Central and did my audition pieces, one of which was a Harvey speech. And then their process there was they'd put you together with a bunch of other people who had done their preliminary auditions and who they were interested in. And then you'd sort of do a day of classes and things. You'd do a voice class, a movement class, something called an ear test. I remember various things. They would work on your audition pieces. And after each one of those sessions, people would be cut. It was very straightforward, and we'd all gather in this kind of central area. A woman, Mrs. Gray, would come in and she'd read off some names and she'd say, "You're free to go, and the rest of you can stay." And it whittled down to the end of the day. It took the whole day. At the end of the day, a woman named Carol Royal and I were the only ones left. And they said, "Well, you're the first two members of the class if you want to be in it." So I
wow.
And then at that point, I'd spent a whole day with these instructors and learned the way this school worked and, the kind of type of work we'd be doing. And also the actual people I would be working with, the instructors, professors.
Yeah, it sounds like such a much more kind of humane way to go through the audition
incredibly
process.
Human. And it spoiled me for, don't get me started. I do not understand why it takes people so long. I don't. To cast people. I don't understand why you can't say, those people made a 3-year commitment to me. And Central doesn't do that bullshit of admitting a class of 100, only ever intending to matriculate 25. A lot of American universities, I think, do that programs, which is, as far as I'm concerned, just a way to steal money from people who, put in a year or two of drama education only to be cut. I don't understand that. I just don't understand it. Central, it was a 3-year course, so they were making on that day a 3-year commitment to me on the strength of what they saw. And I do not understand why it takes people so long to make up their minds about things. They got to see you once, they got to see you twice, they got to come back again, third time for, little pissant shows. It's extraordinary. And so this, I can see you laughing. This experience ruined me for that kind of thing. Central, they admit a class of about 25, 26 people. And they say, they try to build it as almost like a little rep company. Because in the third year, you're doing public performances, not until the third year. And agents, casting directors, all kinds of people come to see these things, and the general public. And you're only ever working with your own class. There are three years of people there at a time, but classes don't mix, except socially. So they're trying to build a little rep company. So there would always be, a few more men than women, because that's the way plays are written. There'd be some character people. There'd be some, people who are just unbelievably beautiful. There would be, all kinds of things, because they were going to have to cast their shows from that group of people. Yeah, they made the decision, and I liked it so much that I just canceled my applications everywhere else. And that was the end of that. Then I started. that was in, I think, January of 73, and then in the fall of 73, I started at Central.
Well, and one of the things I love about London, I've only been a couple times, is how much of a theater town it is. Like the couple times I've been there, you almost wouldn't know that movies are happening. Like you see just as many advertisements for shows, for theater as anything else, if not more so. And so I can only imagine, even at that time, there was still, there was just so much great theater to see, whether it was at the National or, other places in the West End. So I imagine that was part of the kind of less quote unquote formal education, is just going to see a lot of great theater.
Absolutely. And it was, It's more expensive now, but it was, sort of reasonably priced. And I think it's still, certainly compared to Broadway, it's still fairly reasonably priced. I don't know. I haven't been there for a while. But one of the great perks at Central was, and by the way, the school is totally different now. I have no idea what the school is like anymore. I know that they now only offer a BA program. I mean, you have to get a degree now. We just came out with a certificate that said we'd been through the course. Like, here's my acting certificate. Like a license or something. So it's they've had to change to keep their funding sources and so on. But one of the things they did have was in your first year, which is not a demanding work year, you could be an usher at the National Theater, which at the time was at the Old Vic. So I would do that. Yeah. And you'd finish school and go down to the Old Vic, and you could go, you could use the canteen, which is, this sort of food place. And since you were an employee, I don't think I can't remember if you didn't have to pay or if it was like just a ridiculously low amount of, low price. But you could, you could go there and grab a meal, and you'd be eating with Laurence Olivier and Alec McCowan and Jenny Agata, and
holy cow,
yeah. I mean, they'd just be at the next table. I never actually worked up the nerve to speak to these people. But they were all right there. It was just, it's like sitting in the green room kind of with them. But the great thing, of course, is that you got to see some terrific shows. But the really great thing was that you got to see them over and over again. So I saw the original production of Equus maybe 15 times. Not every single word of every performance, but you got to see. You see it every time. Alec McCowan in this incredible performance. But, that kind of thing is, you learn stuff by watching that.
Well, yeah. And certainly, it allows you over the course of a production to notice things as a fellow actor of like, oh, this is how, you get to kind of look a little bit deeper, about what is actually, how are they actually doing this? Because the first time it just might be the experience kind of washes over you, and you're you're drenched in that. And then the more you see it, you're understanding, okay, here's the craft. It's not, I'm watching, these exercises on stage, but you're seeing what they need to do to inhabit this. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a real, boon.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when I lived in Los Angeles, I didn't usher, but I was involved in like the Ovation Awards. And so, you just get to see a lot of theater that way. And it wasn't the same kind of experience of getting to see it over and over, but you can see a lot of theater. But in Chicago, I know there's a couple different programs, but Steppenwolf has an ushering program that anyone can join. And I've done for the last few years. I've seen almost everything they've done. And it's
great.
Yeah. I mean, and of course you talk about nowadays, the cost of what it takes to go see a play. I mean, seats at Steppenwolf are not cheap. I know, I scanned the tickets. And, you feel like you're getting away with something that I would imagine it was similar at the National, that like someone's going to grab you and go, what are you doing? You got to get out of here.
Oh, no. I think we had I seem to remember having little uniform jackets, little horrible.
Well, no. I mean, just the idea of like, you feel like
so no one is going to throw us out.
No, not that they were going to actually throw it, but you feel like you're getting away with something because it's such an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And you're seeing all this stuff for free that people are paying good money for. And it can be such a valuable lesson, in terms of the craft and all that. Well, I am curious. So was the school? It's a Central School of Speech and Drama, right? That's the official.
Yeah, that's what it was called. It's now called. They changed the name to the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama.
Okay, all right. Well, and it's funny. I worked with someone recently who went to what is it? The is it the Royal Academy or the
RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts.
And she said she goes, everybody in America. She's an American. She said everybody in America, swoons when they hear that word royal. But she goes, it's pretty much just saying federal. Like if you said like the federal school, of drama, people wouldn't have the same kind of Americans wouldn't have the same kind of reaction to it.
That's the reason they tacked it. I mean, they do have you have to have somebody has to put their crest on your place. You can't just decide. You have to have a sponsorship, from somebody, the Duchess of Kent or something.
Right. One of the things that comes up for me with you, Geoffrey, is that, I want to give you my own kind of perception of who I think you are as an actor, because to me, you've always seemed like an actor who is like very sensible, very level-headed, very, calm and collected. And it's, these are all very, I would say, kind of desirable qualities, because it's very easy for me to get into your head, to overly worry, to be overly anxious and all this kind of stuff. And I've always seen you, whether as a teacher or as a fellow actor, just someone that's just kind of like, well, no, that's this kind of very cut and dry sense of, well, this is what we got to do, and this is what we're going to do. And I'm curious if that is at all accurate. Is that, how you approach things?
I would say all that is true. And if that's your perception, then that's your perception. And it, it has value. And yes, that's the way I come off. I have probably as turbulent an inner life as anyone. That's part of, an actor's resource. I'm not teaching a class at Antaeus, the company that we've both been involved with at various times, right? And I was talking yesterday to the class about, one of the joys, one of the fun parts about being an actor is you get to access these parts of your life, or these things, these inner things you wouldn't even talk to anybody about. And we usually instantly think of, horrible, kind of nasty things, but there are also inner joys, that you might not be willing to share with the general public. But when you're playing, we're doing a scene from Candida, when you're playing a character like Marchbanks, who's a poet who kind of lives in his own world, when you're playing that part, then you get to do that for a while. You can't live that way. You can't exist that way, day to day. Yeah, but I am probably a very, kind of straightforward person. That's actually the kind of actor that Central would attract. It's probably, the kind of person that was turned out by my education and the people, the people I came up against, teachers, starting right from way back in junior high school, Mrs. Gray and Miss Circo. I remember those people. Those are the people who give you permission, or they give you examples. And the way I work it works for me. It seems to get things done. It's the kind of actor I like to see. I remember there was a guy at Central. It was the first time I sort of remember consciously having this feeling. A guy named Sam Blackwell. He was a couple of years ahead of us. He's now I don't think he acts anymore. He's now a writer, and he directs also. And I remember watching him because, we first years would watch the third years performing. And I remember he was the kind of actor when he came on stage as an audience person, you kind of relax, but not in a way that, not in in a way like you knew this guy was going to take you along. You didn't, not that he wasn't, scary occasionally or startling or all those things that you want to be as an actor, but there was never any. I just remember this feeling that he would take care of you. You were reassured when he came on stage, and someone, in a very great compliment to me, said something similar not too long ago about, watching me perform, and I think that is just the very highest sort of compliment. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to be surprising or you're not going to sort of give your all. It doesn't mean that I hope as an actor I don't sort of coast along in neutral in a way that doesn't impinge. But you just need to do your work so that you can interact with people, take care of the audience. There's a lot of caretaking going on. I did have a teacher once who told me I was too generous, which is a note I remember in a scene or a show. I can't remember. It was probably at school.
What did that mean to you? What did to be too generous?
It's hard to describe. In that particular scene, I somehow wasn't. I can sort of know it when I see it, but it's hard to describe. As an actor, I wasn't really fulfilling I wasn't trying hard enough probably to accomplish what I needed to accomplish in the scene, what my character needed to accomplish or get, or all those things. What was my objective? What was I trying to make the other person say, do, or feel, as Sabin Epstein says. There are things you have to do. You have to typically be moving forward. And I probably wasn't doing that strongly enough. There's a balance.
So would you say the kind of the antidote, at least for you, when it comes to that turbulent life or the anxiety or the worry that can creep in, is it just the focusing on the work?
Oh, you mean life in general?
Life in terms of as an actor, because there's just a lot of opportunity for stress, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot, whether it's playing something or auditioning for something or, career-wise.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, as everyone knows, it's when you're actually working, then the problems that you're solving are the problems that you want to solve. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? What's going on in the scene? How do I keep open? Am I going to be seen? They can be all kinds of things. Can I be heard? Is what I'm trying to convey emotionally getting out there? There's those are all the sort of fun acting problems. The other problems, the problems that happen when you're out of work are, they can be extremely dark. You have lots of doubt, lots of, even when you've been doing this a long time, it's stage actors, and most of the people I know, stage actors, even quite late on, you always think this is going to be your last job. You always think, oh, how am I, what's my next thing? It was interesting. I was just on this long tour, a year-long tour with The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. We were all over the country, production contract. Everything was great. Everything was great. But you could feel the whole company certainly in about the last 6 weeks, everybody started to think, what's next? And you could feel that focus just gradually shift from, we're all in this together and we're having fun and, going out to dinner and it's not that we began to splinter, but people really began to think about what's next. And some people had jobs, to go to, and others who didn't. You could feel that anxiety, even after something like that, where, everybody who finished that certainly was going to get unemployment, and it had some kind of nest egg and all that by the end of that. But there's always that anxiety. So there have been many times when, when I've thought, this is stupid. I should have got a real job. That whole thing about not wanting any more academics was stupid. I should have gotten an MA or become a lawyer, or I don't know how you solve it. You can't give into it too much, or you end up a drunk or something like that, and then you're kind of useless professionally.
I would imagine this is one of those situations where, like, being married to an actor, they really get what you're going through. And of course, you were also lucky that Amelia was in this tour with you, so you guys could kind of, talk about this if there was any doubt or fears or things like that, and you understand the other person.
Yes, I would think that could also be, it didn't come up with this tour because everything is great. It's just, I was just trying to say that even when things are going really well for people, particularly theater actors, there's this kind of dread at the end of every show. But yes, and I think this is sometimes and I don't know because this is pure speculation, but why it's sometimes difficult for two actors to be together. Although I know several successful couples, marriages. Although you should be able to understand what the other person is going through and either A, help, or B, not help. Just, keep your mouth shut, stay out of the way. That's a big thing to do a lot. But I've also thought it was, I think it can be difficult if one person is much more successful than another. But again, this is completely a personality thing. If one person is much more successful than another, I think sometimes that can put a strain on, on a romantic relationship. So whatever you have between you has to be bigger than that.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask specifically, and I do want to get into a little bit of work in just a second, but you've done a number of these tours, whether it's like through kind of more radio plays, live performances, and then, of course, this was, a full production. How do you keep that fresh for yourself? I mean, some of these plays I think you've come back to, like the radio things, there've been breaks in between and like you'll do them again. And how does it, how do you keep up the sense of either discovery for yourself or?
How do you keep a performance fresh? Is that kind of?
Yeah, exactly. So, because, I imagine like for myself, I'm not saying I get bored easily, but, doing something for, 6 months or a year, and doing the same thing every night, like that's a commitment of, one kind.
It is. The two longest things I've done was this Curious Incident tour just now, and then I did a tour of a musical called Crazy for You. That was 22 years ago or something. And that was about a year and a half. They were both relatively small parts, frankly, and the more the bigger roles I've done have just never been that long. I've done a lot of regional theater, but there you're doing 5-6 weeks of performances, if you're lucky. So it hasn't been too much of a problem. But here's what I think, because I was watching the people who were doing the bigger roles in all these shows, and I never, in either one, the musical or Curious, I never thought anyone was dogging it. No one was ever sort of phoning it in that I recall. Now, I've seen Broadway shows where I thought people were phoning it in, and I think that's outrageous. I think it's horrible. I remember seeing a show once that I actually took my son and daughter-in-law to, because it was something that they wanted to see. So I'd spent, a couple $100 on this, and I remember watching it, and the lead was not good. And I'm not going to go into what the show was or who the person was, but he wasn't very good. I thought some of the chorus people seemed to be kind of phoning it in. And I mentioned to someone, they said, oh, he's a replacement. He's only been in it for a week. The guy who opened it, left after a while. So he's the replacement. And I just thought that's absolutely no excuse whatsoever. I mean, I don't understand that. It's Broadway. That guy is probably making $8,000 or $10,000 a week. And so not being ready is not an excuse. It's just, and I actually think that's part of the deal, particularly when you're in these big shows, those two tours, the pay is good. That's your job, and you're making more money than lots of people make. You work 3 or 4 hours a night. And if you include, the fact that, yes, you can't go out to dinner. Yes, in the middle of the afternoon, you start thinking about the show, even when you're doing a small part. Yes, you have to stay physically fit and all that sort of thing. But you're not making brake linings, You're not on an assembly line. You're not a doctor. So just do your job. And it's kind of the same thing you were saying about my attitude before. I don't see what's so hard about it.
This is the Geoffrey I know, yeah.
I honestly do not see what's so hard about that. Now, when you're doing this stuff happens in Chicago. I know, you don't have the 99 seat thing there, but I know lots of people are working for not very much money. I saw a show just the other day. Fantastic performance by this young man. Very demanding. But it was a 99 seat show at the Road Theater here in North Hollywood. And I was talking to him afterwards, and great. And he said, thanks. He said, I'm sorry, I got to run. I got to get to work. And somebody said, what do you mean you have to go to work? He said, I bartending shift. I got to go. So he had to go and make money to live so he could do this essentially non-paid thing that he was doing for the love of it. But when you're doing it that way, it can be a little harder. But you owe it to the audience who've paid money to sit down. Even in 99 seat theater, people are shelling out
sure
$15, $20, $30. You owe it to the audience. You owe it to your fellow actors. And I don't know what the technique is. I don't know what the technique is. That's sort of something you have to discover. You have to keep finding the excitement every time. And sometimes maybe it isn't there exactly every night. You have a sort of almost a fiduciary obligation to keep your work to a standard when you're doing it professionally because you're being paid. And often it's not particularly well. Sometimes it is well. But it's just your obligation. That's your job as a professional. Not doing something well because, you're not in the mood or, your dog is sick or, you don't like the way things are going politically. I'm sorry, that's Bush League. That's amateur stuff.
Right.
Amateurs let themselves be thrown by things like that.
Right.
Even if it's personal. Now, I'm not saying you can't use that in some way.
Sure.
But to shortchange the people who are there to see you is it's just amateur in my book, and that's not good.
No,
it's not a good thing.
I agree.
And I'm not quite sure what the technique is to keep that fresh. You have to. There are ways. I'm not quite sure what the mental things. I'll tell you one thing that helped with Curious Incident was that there was a obligatory warm up before the show. Everybody had to show up. It was not optional. That helps. Even 15 minutes doing that together, somehow it helps you leave the day behind and get to where you're supposed to be. The physical aspect, I think, is key. If you get your voice in where it's supposed to be, if you're breathing correctly, you put yourself into your job the way you should. That's one way to start.
Yeah, because I think there are many other professions where we would not expect the person to be thrown by, what is going on socially or politically or with their pet, whether it could be at the high end of doctor or lawyer or just someone, at the grocery store. It's like, hey, look, you're being paid to do this thing. I just, I don't need, I just need you to do this thing, please.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that note, actually, I'd love to take a really quick look at Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which you played the player a few years back. And I'm sure we could spend an hour and a half or more just talking about the play and the part. But there was a particular, I guess I'll just let you kind of set it up or what you want to talk about.
I thought I would just look at this section where I have notes of what I was thinking. It's dealing with a sort of monologue, a long speech the player has in Act 2.
Okay.
And the director of this show, a man named Steve Stetler, is a director I've worked with a number of times, and he's become sort of my gold standard for directors. This is at a theater where Steve, a guy named Tim Fort, and Malcolm Ewan, who your Chicago listeners will know, he's like Mr. Stage Management at Steppenwolf and Chicago Theater in general. These three guys have run this theater, a regional theater in Vermont called the Weston Playhouse for many years now. They actually took it from a non-professional summer theater through all the steps that you're supposed to go to. It's now a regional theater, a LORT theater. They're all good directors. Steve I like because he actually breaks the play down I realize this is the radio, so you can't see the script I'm thumbing through. But he breaks the play down and names the sections, names the beats. And you're always free to, as an actor, you're free to challenge that or talk about it. And, we do. But the rehearsal periods at Weston used to be shorter. They're now more of sort of a standard 3-week thing. But they used to be, 2 weeks. And there's not a lot of time for messing around. So with Steve, if you had another idea or a better idea and you wanted to try it, you were welcome to do it. But it better work, because there's not a lot of time to futz around and do naval exploring and all that kind of thing. Not that I know I'm being disparaging. Not that long rehearsal periods are not good, but there's also something to be said for having a framework within which to work and either accepting that or coming up with something better, but coming up with something better now.
Right.
Anyway.
No, I'm curious. When you said he names like the beats and the moments, like what's an example of that? Or
here's an example. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come across, or actually the players come across Rosencrantz and Guildenstern for a second time, and the beat before this is called "Marking the Territory," where these guys talk about what's going on, where they've been, and then the name of this beat where the player is berating them, I call Understanding the Betrayal. And you'll notice we've got marking, we've got understanding, we've got words you can work on. The beat after this is called Establishing the New Order. After that, it was Learning from the Player. So, right, those are all active verbs.
Sure. And just to give people a frame of reference, I'll have the text on the website, but if they're following along, it's the player starts with, "We can't look each other in the face." It's that section that...
Yes. The player is, he's trying to shut them up. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are going on one of their little back and forth things about trying to figure out what had actually gone on.
Right.
And then he's got this speech where and I have all this written down. So Understanding the Betrayal is sort of the name of this beat.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have to do is make them understand. The player has to make Rosencrantz and Guildenstern understand what has happened, because what they did before was walk out. They just left. And so I, as the player, who's an actor, I'm trying to make these two idiots understand why I feel betrayed, why what they did was wrong. And I wrote down, make them understand, first general principles, then the specific betrayal. That came from reading the speech over and over and again and sort of seeing how it was constructed. So that's the way I decided it was constructed. He talks in general about, you don't understand the humiliation of it, to be tricked out of a single assumption that makes our existence viable, that someone is watching. So he's telling them, and then he describes the scene of what it was like when they were acting out this play in their silly costumes and swords and declaiming to the heavens, and then they start to look around and there's nobody watching them. Well, if there's nobody watching an actor, you don't exist in a way. Mm-hmm. He's trying to make them understand what a horrible thing they've done. Then I have other notes here. What do I want from them? What do I want them to do? I want to vent, to clear the fog of shame and anger. Their apology / acknowledgement is a way to reclaim my status, my viability. So these are all things that, mentally you can work on. I'm trying to get them to do certain things, which then feeds back, which makes me feel better, because often that's what scenes are about. I'm trying to get something from you in order to benefit myself.
Right.
But the key factor in that is getting something from you. It's not just, I want to feel better about myself. Well, we all want to feel better about ourselves, but how do we accomplish that? That's the thing that allows you to go forward. At the end of it, I wrote, dealt with, that's the best explanation I can offer. And then I wrote, and my rage is spent. So, there's an emotional element. This guy's been walking around just furious, so pissed off. And when he finally gets a chance to confront these guys, he does. But he doesn't just say, what the hell did you do that for? He has to explain to them the whole world, then tell them what they did wrong. And by the time he's done that, he's managed to realign himself, what's the word I want? Get himself back on the rails.
Oh, well, actually, there's that word, equanimity. I think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern
there you go.
Earlier in the play.
He has, and also in so doing, he's, these are all things that you'll hear in various acting classes or techniques. He's also reestablished his status, because what they had done by leaving him high and dry was remove his status, and he's now reasserted it over them.
It's so fascinating to hear you talk about this, because I can catch myself right now as I'm looking at the script and, knowing it's a Tom Stoppard play, that there's this sense of, I think I know how to, how I would play this scene, which is not what you want to do. There's this idea of, well, what does a Tom Stoppard play sound like? Or what's this, if this character's, big and buffoonish, and if you come from that place, it's just not going to resonate for you as an actor, and certainly not with the audience. And it's really helpful to hear these things over and over again, kind of drilled in of like, this is where you make the connection.
Yeah. And one reason I picked this particular speech in this particular play, because I remember it took a lot of work. I remember, spending a lot of time with Steve kind of alone, working this particular scene, because it's a big one. And I have a lot of things written down, which is unusual. I don't often take a lot of notes. I certainly do take notes. I mean, other than, enter from upstage left with bag at center. But because these are all things you hear in every acting class. But, you when you're in it, you have to sort of be reminded of it. At the bottom of the page, I wrote, this is sense memory, not a set speech. Be in it rather than on it. I'll do this second bit. And again, what was I going to say? I was going to say something really, really interesting. That was, I remember reading this great thing once that someone had asked Anthony Hopkins, the same kind of thing. How do you prepare? How do you approach a play? He said, well, I read the play. And they went, oh, yes, of course. Great. And then what do you do? And he said, then I read the play again. And then what? He said, I read the play again. And he was probably being a little facetious, but you just have to go over it and over it and over it. You kind of read the first time to see what the plot is. You read it the second time for sense. You read it the third time out loud. And, doing things out loud always is different because what you just said, you read a Tom Stoppard piece and you go, I get this. I know what's going on here. But then you read out loud and you go, oh, wait, how does that phrase fit in? And it's only after reading it through a few times that you begin to get this kind of thing, this bit where I wrote, make them understand first the general principles, then the specific betrayal. That's the way the speech is written. It's like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That you'll just see that in writers all the time, from David Mamet to Shakespeare, whether it's 3 sentences or 30 lines. That's frequently what these kind of things are. So just read it. All right, here. We're actors. We pledged our identities, secure in the conventions of our trade, that someone would be watching. And then, gradually, no one was. We were caught high and dry. It was not until the murderer's long soliloquy that we were able to look around, frozen as we were in profile. Our eyes searched you out first confidently, then hesitantly, then desperately, as each patch of turf, each log, every exposed corner in every direction proved uninhabited. And all the while the murderous king addressed the horizon with his dreary, interminable guilt. Our heads began to move, wary as lizards. The corpse of unsullied Rosalinda peeped through his fingers, and the king faltered. Even then, habit and a stubborn trust that our audience spied upon us from behind the nearest bush forced our bodies to blunder on long after they'd emptied of meaning, until, like runaway carts, they dragged to a halt. No one came forward. No one shouted at us. The silence was unbreakable. It imposed itself upon us. It was obscene. We took off our crowns and swords and cloth of gold and moved silent on the road to Elsinore.
That was wonderful.
And at the end of that, Guildenstern gives him sort of a slow clap, and he says, brilliant, brilliant, if these eyes could weep. Even in telling the story, the player gets caught up in playing.
Right.
But you get the point was he was
devastated. Yeah. And you see that you see that through line. It's not just an actor talking to hear his own voice. It's you see the pain and the imagery is so beautiful, but you see how that is really pushing him through this. So yeah, wow, thank you, Geoffrey. That was great. I know. For a midweek reading of the player, it was actually I loved it. So now I love to see the show. But all right, I just have a few more questions, and these are more kind of rapid fire because we could talk for another couple hours, but we all have things to do. But your answers don't have to be rapid fire or as quick as the questions. One thing I'm very curious about is what was it like to work on a Steven Spielberg movie, in the BFG? That's something that so many actors think, oh God, I'd love to work on a Spielberg film. And, and I know that is just one of many film and TV projects you've done, but,
it was great. It was an incredibly disciplined and well put together cast, including the drivers who would pick you up. They kept saying, "Oh, this is the best movie to work on."
Wow!
They'd start at 7 a.m. They'd finish at 5 every night. Everybody knew what they were doing. These are all people he's worked with many times before. Very professional crew. So it was all there's no weirdness or anything. The most fun part was. The day of my close-up, actually, Stevens couldn't be there. He was down in Los Angeles, so they'd set up a monitor in his house, and we did a couple of different takes with his amazing cinematographer. So let's do a little of this, a little of this. We'll send it to Steven and see what he says. And they did that, and someone said, "Oh, come over here, and Steven wants to talk to you." So I'm literally holding somebody's iPhone, and Steven, "Hey, good morning, Geoffrey. How you doing? Good morning, good morning." It's just like 8 a.m, and he began to give me a few suggestions, which were perfectly normal. It's like, wait until the camera stops before you react, and then we'll do it another time where you're reacting as you feel the camera come in towards you, something like that. But the funny thing was that as he was talking, the whole time he was beating eggs. He was making breakfast in his kitchen. So he's like beating his, wait until the camera, I'm on the phone, I'll be right there. And wait until the camera stops. And it was very funny.
Well, it sounds like just such a lesson in
very enjoyable.
Somebody who knows exactly what he wants, and somebody who has worked for decades, like yourself, and just kind of knows what he's looking for and knows how to approach it and knows how to communicate it too, which is also really important. Yep. Now, I'm also wondering, since you do a lot of teaching and I knew you kind of, well, actually, I guess I did know you as a fellow actor first, but then as a teacher in later years. What advice would you give to, smart, driven, college age or, college graduated students about to enter this real world? You said you kind of wanted to delay that a little bit. Or if you had to go back and tell your, 22-year-old self of like, no, you're not going to go to London. You got to get out there.
This is terrible. I really don't have any advice. Now I'll spend 10 minutes giving you advice. You have to be involved in every possible thing you can, because you never know. There's no direct route. You can't intern at a law firm and then become a junior partner and then be a doctor, where the road is a little more laid out for you. You just never know where it's going to come from. So I would say you have to do everything. I used to advise people if you really want to do film and TV, you should come to Los Angeles, if that's your decision, because you're not going to get much in New York. But that's not true anymore. There's a lot of film and TV going on in New York. I will say about doing small theater projects in Los Angeles, 99-seat stuff where you're not being paid. Absolutely do it, because you'll meet people. It's the people you meet. It's the connections you make, the director you work with or the writer or someone who will, one hopes, use you again. My one piece of advice for doing 99-seat theater or non-paying theater is to, by all means, do it, but make sure you know why you're doing it. Because there will come a point, probably late in rehearsal, where you go, this is bullshit. I can't stand this. Why am I doing this? I'm not making any money. I'm going from here to my bartending job. And if you don't know why you're doing it, you'll be lost and you'll feel this obligation to stay in it, because, you like somebody in it, or you just feel an obligation. But if you know why you're doing it, you like to play, or you want to meet that director, or you just need the experience, or, any reason can be good. You're going to need a reason to hang on to at some point. So just make sure you know why you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, and the other thing is, if in those situations, if things aren't going well and it's causing you more stress than it's worth it, you should bail out. People often say this, saying no is the most empowering thing you can do in our profession, and probably in any profession. Because then you've actually made a decision. So if you get into something and it's not working out, say no, move on. It's not the end of the world. You'll work again. I swear to God. I've oftentimes thought I wouldn't work again. You'll always work again. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll finally get out. Maybe you'll find a more interesting thing to do. Maybe you'll go back to law school. I have a nephew who thought he wanted to be a producer in the movies, and it kind of didn't work out. He kept plugging away at it, and finally went back to law school, and now he's doing fine as an attorney. And that was late in life. It was not late in life, but he was in his 30s.
Yeah.
When he decided to do this. So maybe something else will happen. But don't just waste your time plugging away on something that isn't rewarding.
Yeah.
Just go. What else can I advise? Try to keep your health.
Well, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed talking. I mean, there's so much I have learned about you, which has been really exciting. So I mean, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time, Geoffrey. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've enjoyed it. Thank you for talking to me. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Have some of that popcorn for me. Oh, carrots.
Sounds good, Geoffrey.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey guys, it's Nathan here one more time. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything. And if you can take a minute to rate and review this in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts, that will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all comments, and thank you very much for doing that. Be sure to visit workingactorsjourney.com/podcast for the show notes and any links from today's episode. You can also follow the show at WA Journey on Twitter and Instagram. Feel free to connect and let us know what did you enjoy from the show. Don't forget to check out freemeditationcourse.com. Sign up right now to start making your life easier, calmer, and more enjoyable. Thank you again to today's guest. I really appreciate and value all the people that contribute their time to making this show possible. I'm Nathan Agin, and thanks for listening.